Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. This week after Father's Day, we've spent our time together looking at some fathers mentioned in the Bible and noticing how some were good and some were not so good. And you might have expected we would talk about Joseph, Jesus' earthly father. Joseph took responsibility to raise Jesus even though Jesus wasn't his child. Joseph is a great model in the Bible of being a father. And it is interesting to note that in Matthew's gospel, the only person other than Jesus to be called righteous is Joseph. But I really like looking at more obscure characters in these stories, so we're not really going to focus on Joseph. Rather, I want to remind you of the common wisdom that goes around saying that pastors' kids are the worst behaved of all kids. Now, I'm a pastor's kid, and I'm not sure that's true, and I don't think it was true of my own kids either. Unfortunately, it can sometimes seem true with some of the people God raised up and used to lead God's people in the Bible. We saw it with the high priest Eli, and then with Samuel, and then with King David. It is also what we find with Gideon. Gideon was one of the best judges of Israel, raised up by God to deliver the people from the oppression of Midian, a neighboring country that had conquered Israel. Now, just to remind you, it was Gideon who cast a fleece to determine God's will, and who then attacked an army of the Midianites with only 300 soldiers of his own. God gave him a great victory that day. However, as a father, he was somewhat lacking. In fact, the longer you read Gideon's story, the more you see him exalting his own importance and seeming to lessen the importance of God. More and more he seems to point to his own glory instead of to God's. The Bible tells us at the end of Judges 8 that Gideon had 70 sons with his many wives, and then it speaks of Gideon's death. Then it tells that as soon as Gideon was dead, the people all went back to their ways of worshiping the Baals and forsaking God. One of Gideon's sons, Abimelech, went to some villages and got their support in order to rule over them. And then to quell anyone who might be a threat to his leadership, he killed all his other brothers except one named Jotham, who escaped. Jotham told what Abimelech had done, and it was not well received. Abimelech ruled by force for 3 years, but eventually he came to an ignominious end, at least in those times. After conquering one city, he was walking near the city wall, and a woman loosened a tile and threw it down on his head, killing him. People ended up laughing at Abimelech for being killed by a woman. Nevertheless, one must wonder at what kind of father Gideon must have been to have a son who usurped the nation and killed 68 of his brothers. The father who sets a contrasting example is Jairus in the New Testament. Jairus is the leader of the synagogue who seeks the help of Jesus to cure his young daughter. Actually, the Gospels tell this story a little differently. In some Gospels, the little girl is ill and dying, and Jesus gets delayed on his way to help, and the girl dies. Jesus raises her to life again. But in the Gospel of Matthew, the way the story is told is that Jairus seeks Jesus' help for his daughter, who had already died. It is a profound statement of Jairus' love for his daughter and of his desperation. At this point in the Gospel, Jesus hadn't raised anyone to life. So how is it that Jairus thinks Jesus can do this? Maybe Jairus had faith, or maybe he was that desperate to help the daughter he loved so deeply. Jesus is also a rather controversial person, and for the leader of a synagogue to go to Jesus could have been risky for someone in his position. But Jairus didn't let that stop him. His love for his daughter was more important to him. He would do whatever he could for his daughter. And that's the kind of love God intends for fathers to have, for all parents to have for their children. It's the same kind of love God has for us. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.